Hey y'all, this is Monica from the USA, today's host of the Girl Power Podcast. Today I will be joined by the wonderful Eliza Cummings. I've known Eliza for a long time, all the way back since middle school, and now she's an open water marathon swimmer who's won multiple awards, including being the youngest and fastest person to swim across Cape Cod Bay. She began open water marathon swimming at age 20, and outside of that, she has a background in international relations and African studies. While she's a dual Czech-American citizen, she now lives with her fiancé in Wellington, New Zealand, where she works for a large humanitarian organization. A very accomplished athlete and an all-around amazing person, let's welcome Eliza.
I'm Isha from India.
I am Angel from the Philippines.
I am Tolex from Laos.
I'm Monica from the United States, and we are Girl Power.
Girl Power. Girl Power.
Girl Power.
Confident, compassionate,
and connected.
Eliza, glad to have you on.
Oh, thanks so much, Monica. Really excited to be here.
Yeah. So how I want to start off is, could you please briefly share with us your background and what brought you to New Zealand?
Sure. So I am a Czech-American dual citizen who grew up in Denver, Colorado. And actually, that's how Monica and I know each other originally, way back from middle school. So yeah, I went to a school called the Denver Center for International Studies, and which was really amazing because it was a school that focused on being a global citizen and cross-cultural communications and language studies and social sciences. So that really set me off on a very particular kind of track. So in high school, I ended up studying abroad for a year through Rotary International in the Philippines, then came back to the States and really wanted to go abroad again, ended up interning for a nonprofit in northern Uganda, then eventually made my way to Smith College, where I completed my BA in basically political science and global South development. During that time, I actually then went back to Uganda and studied and did some research there. And at Smith is when I actually started swimming much more competitively and got into open water marathon swimming. And yeah, after I graduated, I worked for a refugee resettlement agency for a little while, and then moved back to Massachusetts and was living in Boston, which is where I met and fell in love with a New Zealander. So after her visa ended, we did long distance for a little bit, and then I decided to move abroad again and come to New Zealand. So now I've been in New Zealand for the past 2 years.
That's amazing. So, to move on to the next question, when did you first begin swimming and what drew you to pursue it more seriously? You mentioned you had started more seriously in university, but had you done swimming before that?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely a kid who would spend summers at the pool, and at my babushka, my grandmother on my mom's side, she had a condo, and her condominium complex had a pool. So we'd spend many a summer day there. So that's where I learned how to swim. And yeah, but I was not a club swimmer. I wasn't on a swim team until I actually was in high school. And the school that I went to didn't, because it was a magnet program, it didn't have its own high school sports. So if you wanted to play sports, you would go over to the high school, a bigger public high school that was right nearby down the road. So I swam for West High School my freshman, sophomore, not junior year because I was in the Philippines, but then senior year. So go West High School. And so I swam there, and it was a really amazing swim program because honestly about half the students, half the girls who joined didn't know how to swim when they joined. And then the other half could swim. There were very few really like highly competitive swimmers. So it was really about kind of creating a family environment. And I'm really grateful for that because I think that's what gave me a real love and passion for the sport of swimming, because from the very get-go in my competitive, in quotation marks, competitive experience in high school, it was always really about the people and about the community that you create. So I swam for high school, and then when I graduated, I never thought I was going to go off and swim at university because I was definitely not that good. And I ended up at Smith, and because it was a D3 school, which focuses on academics predominantly, sports are, there and a great kind of opportunity, but I never had kind of imagined doing that. But then because I had on my college application that I had swum in high school, the coach reached out to me and said, oh, well, you should come along to preseason and try out in the first week. So I did. I was the second slowest swimmer. Actually, I think I was, to be honest, the slowest swimmer on the team when I joined. But, I played sports my entire life. So I was really athletic, but had clearly never been trained, clearly did not have good technique. And so, Coach Kim saw some potential in me, I think, and let me join and swim. And I just radically, dramatically improved over my first 2 years, and was really lucky because there were phenomenal swimmers on the team, including the amazing Paige Christie, who she was the captain my sophomore year. She was a senior, and going into that year, she was training and did the English Channel, and she came back from doing that, and she was one of her majors was philosophy. So she came back and gave this really amazing talk in the philosophy department around the mentality and the mental challenge that marathon swimming presents. And that's kind of what planted the seed. And I thought, oh, I want to do that. I could do that. Maybe, I don't know. So Smith is really when I got into competitive swimming. And then because of the other swimmers and community at Smith, that's how I got introduced to open water marathon swimming, this crazy world that I'm now in.
Very cool. So then you mentioned that you've done a couple races. So what races have you been participated in, and what swims are you most proud of?
Great question. There have been a few by now, so I have to think. The first marathon swim I ever did was across the Cape Cod Bay. So, from Plymouth to Provincetown, Massachusetts. And so the thing about marathon swimming is the vast majority of open water marathon swims are what we would call a solo sanctioned swim. So typically you're the only person in the water. You have a support boat watching over you, making sure you don't die and that you're okay. And they're chucking water bottles and food to you in the water that you're eating and chucking back to them. And so most swims are solo sanctioned swims. But there's another class of swims that are kind of organized races. Some of them that are shorter, really have kind of the feeling of, like marathon running racing, where people are competing and you have a place and all that kind of thing. And then there's another kind of class of open water race swims that are really kind of like all tandem solo sanctioned swims. So even though you're racing against people and you'll get a place, it's really about everyone completing the swims. So I haven't done many of the really like running marathon, fast, sprinty, those kinds of things, kind of 10K ish distances, since I like to focus on longer, which usually are solo swims. So the races that I've done though I've done a couple of 10Ks. So I did a 10K down the Hudson River. I have done the SCAR swim series. So that's a 40-mile swim series over 4 days. So it's a staged race. So you do one swim per day. I did that. I've competed in that 2 years. That's definitely one of my favorites. And I also did the Manhattan Marathon swim. So you swim around the island of Manhattan.
Okay.
And that's one of the Triple Crown swims of open water. So the Triple Crowns, the English Channel, Catalina Channel, and then Manhattan. So, and that's an amazing swim because obviously you are swimming around one of the biggest cities in the entire world, and you swim back, you swim under 20 bridges, which is why it's now been renamed 20 Bridges. So the 20 Bridges race, and you get to swim past things like the UN and the Empire State Building, and you just get to watch the city skyline for an entire day while you're slowly making your way around. So those are some of the races I've done. Most proud swims, one of them is definitely the first swim that I ever did, because when I decided to do that marathon swim, I had never even swum a mile in open water before. I just had talked to Paige Christie and thought maybe I could do that, and kind of signed up and threw myself in. And actually the organizer, when I emailed him saying I wanted to do the swim, he emailed me back saying, oh, well, you've never actually done this before, so maybe you should try something shorter first and then come back next year. And I emailed him back saying, no, I want to do this year like this. Trust me, I'll be prepared, even though I didn't know if I would be. So I trained really hard that summer, and then I thought I'd done everything I needed to do. But at the start of that swim, what happened is you start lots of marathon swims really early in the morning. So like 3 a.m. So it's pitch black. And I jumped in and started swimming, and I didn't realize there was this big safety support boat watching me. And then I was here and my brother was in a kayak next to me. So when you're swimming, you just look at the kayaker to kind of get your direction. And the big giant boat is then kind of watching over you. But all of the lights on the big boat were turned off, because if you have lights on at night, it attracts marine life, which is not what you want when you're swimming. So no great white sharks in Cape Cod Bay. So all of those boat lights were off. but I was smelling something really funny. And it wasn't until the sun started coming up that I realized for the first 3 hours of the swim, I'd been inhaling boat fumes. So I had actually, after the first hour, started vomiting a lot in the water and was quite ill. And I didn't tell anyone because I was worried if I told people, they would pull me out of the water for safety reasons. Smart. Anyway, so for the first half of that swim, I was pretty ill the entire time and wasn't able to really eat or drink anything and keep it down. So it was mentally tough. It was physically tough. Finally, when we got away from being behind the boat and more next to it, I wasn't inhaling boat fumes anymore, but it took a few hours after that for me to really start to recover and be able to eat and drink things. So yeah, that swim was just over 9.5 hours. The previous record for that swim was like 9 hours and 45 minutes. And I did it in 9 hours and 31 or 36. So I barely snuck in to get the fastest time of anyone who's done that swim, having been sick for the first half. So that, and also it was my first one that I'd ever done. So that's definitely probably one of my most proud. And then other than that, this past year, I attempted to do a double crossing of Lake Taupo, which is the biggest lake in the North Island in New Zealand. And it's 40 kilometers one way. So it was an 80K swim. And only 2 people have ever done it in history. And the last person to do it successfully was in the 80s, a legendary open water swimmer named Phil Rush. And yeah, so I attempted it and I made it 79.3 kilometers before I was hypoxic. And little did we know, my throat had been been swelling up for the last maybe 10 hours of the swim. It was a 27-hour swim. And so by the time I was getting really towards the end, I was actually hallucinating a little bit. I wasn't able to breathe. I kept choking. At one point, I kind of stopped because they were getting worried about me. And I pointed and I said, I just need to go that way, right? And they said, right. And I put my head back down in the water and started swimming in the opposite direction. So clearly was very disoriented. So yeah, but I mean, swimming for over 24 hours, swimming for 27 hours and making it 79K out of the 80 was a really, it was, I had no idea when I got into the water if I was going to be capable mentally or physically of coming anywhere close. So to come that close with being hypoxic for the last 10 hours, definitely very, very proud of that swim as well.
Yeah, you should be. Those are amazing. Also, that brings me to a question in that it sounds like, I mean, if you're hallucinating or you're not able to breathe or you're throwing up, I mean, I'm sure that at some points you felt unsafe. So when you pushed yourself past limits that physically endangered you, how did you resolve that? Or like, how did the people around you help support you in that?
Totally. It's such a good question. And I think the biggest thing or the message that I try to tell everyone when I talk about open water marathon swimming is that it's not an individual sport. It really is a team sport. So even when you're the only swimmer in the water, it's a team effort of everyone around you who's on your support crew and watching you. So my approach to when I do a marathon swim is that I have one job, and my one job is to keep swimming and to just go stroke by stroke, take it 30-minute segments at a time, really stay present with the experience and to just keep swimming and trust that the people, the experts that I've surrounded myself with who are watching over me, which oftentimes includes my family, on every single swim I've ever done, either my mom, my brother, or my partner have been present to watch and support. So between family and then experts who, captain the boats and, coordinate, I always have to trust that they're watching me and they're making sure that I'm safe. And when I'm not safe, they make a decision to pull me out. So I knew with my first marathon swim, the one that I was getting really ill on, that even though I was not able to retain food and water, I oddly felt well despite how sick I was. And so you do certain things when you are doing a swim. Your support crew, they count the number of strokes you're taking per minute. So if that starts to dramatically decrease, they know something's wrong and they need to get you out, especially because it can show hypothermia. So people keep your stroke count. So even from the very beginning of that swim to the end, I was maintaining the same stroke count. So clearly, even though I was nauseous and throwing up, I was still physically well enough to keep going. Also, you do things like they do mental check-ins with you every time you stop to do a feed and you're treading water and eating and drinking. They check in on you, and sometimes we'll even ask you questions like, what's 2 plus 7, and what year is it, and can you tell me about this? So just doing really quick little mental checks as you then dart off to keep swimming. So yeah, on that first swim, even though I was ill, I felt well enough to keep swimming. On my Topa swim, that was a bit different, because when you are experiencing oxygen deprivation symptoms, you can't think clearly, so you can't communicate what's happening. So, and then as your brain has less and less oxygen, that becomes more and more of a problem. So you can't actually understand what's happening enough to communicate. So I didn't feel unsafe. Because I started feeling paranoid, I remember very distinctly, because the end of that swim was quite hazy for me. I was swimming and I was having a really hard time breathing. I would turn my head to go breathe and then not be able to. And then I would try again and not be able to. And then I remember looking at the people in the support boat, Phil Rush and Mike Cochran and Kat, my partner. And I just remember thinking, oh, they're all so annoyed at me because they just want to like be finished and I'm still swimming and it's taking so long and it's getting dark now. And I thought they were all mad at me because my paranoid, hypoxic, oxygen deprived brain, that's what my thinking was. And I was like, I just have to keep swimming so that they won't be so frustrated with me. And clearly they were all having conversations on the boat going, Eliza's not looking good. Her stroke count's going down. She's not very like agile when we're trying to talk to her. So they started talking maybe 30 minutes before they had to pull me out. That's what, they didn't want to though, because I was so close to the finish that they thought, oh, it's such a shame to pull someone out. But ultimately they made the right decision because they knew that safety is the most important, which it always is. So yeah, the real thing is that I've never felt in the water unsafe. And that the huge thing around that is that because you always bring people along with you who their only responsibility is to keep you safe. So my job is to swim and their job is to keep me safe. And so the team effort there always makes it so that I feel really safe and secure in the water.
Sure. No, it's super important to have people there.
Absolutely.
So then I guess you kind of already answered the question of who do you rely on when swimming. But then how do you prepare for these kinds of races? What's your practice routine like? What do you have to do to mentally and physically prepare?
Yeah, great question. So when I'm in full marathon training mode, I usually swim somewhere between 6 to 8 times a week. So definitely always Monday through Saturday. And often 2 or 3 of those days I do a swim in the morning and in the afternoon. And usually on weekends you do kind of a longer open water swim as well. So yeah, lots of swimming essentially, lots and lots of time in the pool and in open water. And then I also like to mix it up and do some cross training. So lifting weights and building strength and doing rehab stuff out of the pool, lots of stretching. But I think the most important thing with a marathon swim is that honestly, the marathon swim that you do at the end is really just like the cherry on top. It's not the challenging part, because if you've done all the preparation, that's actually just where you get to enjoy the success of the training. So the most grueling part is really the mental energy it takes to be motivated to do that kind of training regimen. So, I mean, lots of things help. Having a great community around you of people that you love to swim with and keep you accountable, that's really, really helpful. But also, honestly, for me, with the Topa swim, because I was training so much, I could not have done it had I not had the partner that I have, because she essentially just took over every other realm of my life that needed slack being picked up. Like I literally did not do a single wash, I didn't do any laundry. I didn't cook a single meal. She would wake up early to make me breakfast so I could sleep in for an extra 10 minutes before I have to go train. Honestly, she was so phenomenal, and I would not have been able to do that swim because I wouldn't have been able to prepare for it the way working full time and trying to train full time, basically as almost second full-time or part-time job. So having people who are around you who can really help and support you is really, really essential. And then other than that, it's just tons of time in the water and in the pool. And then the other thing, the kind of mental preparation component, I do a lot of kind of meditative, contemplative exercises. I do them when I'm swimming. So lots of things, body awareness things, and lots of contemplative exercise. I won't get into it right now because that's a whole other podcast, and there are hundreds of podcasts you can listen to about what contemplative exercises to do. But yeah, lots of visualizations and that kind of thing. So that's really essential, because the hardest thing about doing a marathon swim when you actually get there is not the physical part, because you've trained for it, your body's ready for it. It's really the mind. So I always say that you know, your mind will quit 1,000 times before your body does. So if you can conquer the minefields that you end up being in, then physically your body is capable of doing incredible things. So yeah, that's really the hardest part.
So then, kind of along with that contemplative mindset, have there been any major takeaways you've gained from swimming?
Yeah, 100%. I think the biggest takeaway from swimming is about being in the present moment. And actually, funnily, at Smith College, where I went to university, they, on Paradise Road, on this path that you go down when you're walking down into campus, there's spray painted on the sidewalk this little message that says, "Be here now." And I think about that all the time, not only when I'm swimming, but all the time in my life. About, it's so easy to be really stuck or thinking about the past, or revisiting mistakes, or revisiting experiences, and being really consumed with what's happened in the past. And then in the same vein, it's also super easy to get caught up in always being future oriented, or thinking about what's coming up next, and the anxiety around, especially the world we live in now, about what's around the next corner, and what am I going to do, and how am I going to react. And so oftentimes we lose out on a lot of life because we're either thinking about the past or we're thinking about the future. And the reality is that you live life most fully when you're actually able to just be in the present moment. I mean, and of course, lots of spiritual religious practices talk about that type of presence. And that's kind of the point of a lot of meditation, to really be with yourself in the moment that you're in. So yeah, and I mean, that's how you become successful marathon swimming, because if you enter the water thinking about, I'm going, you know, with my Topa swim, if I thought I'm going to be swimming for the next 27 hours, it's too big for your brain to think about, and you get overwhelmed, and then you're not actually able to do the thing that your body is able to do, because it becomes too much. But if you actually just think about one stroke at a time, and you hear the rhythm of your arm going in and out of the water, and the sound of the bubbles you're making as you're blowing out, and you notice the color and the light reflecting off the water, and you notice the nuances of how many greens and blues, and you then all of a sudden you've been swimming for 9 hours, and it feels like half an hour. So I mean, that's how you make it through a marathon swim. You stay just in the present moment. You think just about, maybe if you're thinking about the future, honestly, only up to the next feed, only up to the next 30-minute mark. And that's how you keep going, because you just stay in the present. And it's the same in my life. Like, whenever I start getting really, really overwhelmed, or thinking, in work, in relationships, and family, all those things, if you actually just get yourself to stay in the present moment, all of a sudden you find a lot of happiness and a lot of beauty in the things that are around you.
Very cool. I think that's a good takeaway for anything, really. But that's wonderful. And then on a slightly different note, so you've lived in quite a few places. And so what have the cultures and expectations around swimming, especially for women, been like?
Yeah, great question. It's funny because I've swum. Yeah, so obviously I started swimming in the States, and then I was in the Philippines, so I swam a little bit as an exchange student, and then I was in Uganda, and when I was in Uganda, especially when I went back and was there during my time at Smith, I was needing to train so that when I came back to Smith, I could get right back into season. So I swam in Uganda as well. It's interesting because in the world of open water marathon swimming, well, in lots of sporting fields, men really dominate, and the pervasive heroes of different sports typically are men. Endurance sports are really interesting because it's kind of the opposite. And there are lots of interesting studies that talk about why women really excel in endurance sports. And yeah, so again, lots of other podcasts talk about that, so I won't get super into it. But what's amazing about open water marathon swimming is that women are really the heroes. Like, the best open water marathon swimmers in the entire world categorically are recognized to be a handful of women, people like Lynn Cox and Sarah Thomas. So that sets a really amazing stage for women internationally who are part of the sport to feel really empowered in what we're doing. With that said, swimming in the context that I have, both in the Philippines and in Uganda, I was swimming in pools. I was just swimming kind of with club teams. And and so not in that women-dominated, amazing endurance sport world, because I hadn't, gotten into that yet. So I guess in the Philippines, I love the Philippines. It's definitely a much more conservative culture thanks to things like 300 years of Spanish colonization and very deeply inherited Catholicism that's still very pervasive. So sports and girls in sports in general in the Philippines have a very different flavor. I think I, as an exchange student, was able to get away with a bit more because I came from a context that was different. So I had two different host families, and one of them had only daughters and then the other had only sons. And I found my experience with my host family with only daughters, because they only had daughters, they didn't have a cultural reference point for raising a son. So they actually let their daughters be very independent and do a lot of things that maybe other families wouldn't. And then when I lived with my host family that just had sons, they were much more protective of me and much more wanting to not control what I was doing, but just watch over me in a very kind of loving, family-oriented kind of way. So no one told me don't swim or that's kind of inappropriate, but I definitely felt very weird putting on a swimming suit and going out in public. And I remember thinking for the first time in my whole life being really cognizant of that. And I think it was because the cultural context was so different. Also because I was like a good foot taller than all the other girls who were swimming. And so size-wise, I just looked ridiculous, like in the swimming suit next to my Filipino friends who were just much more petite than me. In Uganda, the thing that I noticed the most is that just like they drive on the other side of the road, you swim down the opposite side of the lane, which is something that I had never thought of. And in New Zealand, it's the same thing. And it's funny that after you have been swimming in pools for years, you always turn the same way, you swim the same way, and you don't think about it. It just becomes second nature. So I remember in Uganda, there were lots of close accidents of me going off of a wall and almost hitting someone because I was on the wrong side of the lane, the wrong side of the road. In Uganda, it was interesting because I swam with a club team in the capital city, and I swam in a lane with predominantly boys. Honestly, they were all really phenomenal. And, people don't think of Uganda as a place where competitive club swimming might be a thing, but the coach was really amazing. The team was really great. A Ugandan swimmer who went to the Olympics was in a lane like 4 lanes down from me. Because there aren't that many training facilities there aren't that many outdoor, well-maintained pools in Kampala. So there were only a couple, and luckily there was the one closer to my house. And my host mom in Kampala was phenomenal. She was really amazing. She is a contractor and a consultant, so she often gets pulled in for projects with UNICEF and the UN, and to basically and she does lots of monitoring and evaluation for international development projects. And her husband had passed away, so she had been independent on her own. So, and she had a daughter who was, she had a couple of kids, and her oldest daughter was in law school. So it was very kind of in the progressive movement in Kampala, and in this really like awesome academic kind of setting. And she'd come home and hang out with me sometimes. So I think I got really lucky because I had a host mom who, again, had a very not necessarily the typical maybe cultural expectations for what women should or shouldn't do. So she was extremely supportive of me, going and swimming, and she would come and get me because she didn't want me to walk home in the dark after my practices and stuff. So she would, make sure dinner was ready for me when I came home and take care of me and all that kind of stuff. But of course, then when I was doing research in rural Uganda, there were absolutely no pools that were accessible.
I think that's something you have to forfeit at that point a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. I was the coffee cooperative research that I was doing was more important and took up my entire day anyway. So, and I was tempted a couple times to jump into a lake, but I was too worried about creatures and anyway. So overall my experience swimming abroad has been really positive. And like I said, the open water marathon world not only is one in which women really dominate and are regarded as the best of the best, but also it is really an international sport because, we look for ocean swims that are all over the world in beautiful different places. So yeah, it is a sport that is all over the world, but it's not accessible to everyone. So I think it is really important to note that the average marathon swimmer is typically in a 40s or above white man from a typically developed country, just because of the cost often associated with marathon swims, because you obviously have to pay for a boat to accompany you for sometimes 27 hours. So that's a very long day. And boat fuel, and then of course even just if you're going to swim internationally, traveling, the accommodations for your crew, so it can get quite expensive. So it is a sport that has real accessibility issues. Now more and more there are some really cool things happening and opportunities and scholarships and sponsorships, especially for younger folks and younger international swimmers to be engaged, because that's what we want to see happening in the sport. But it is a sport where me as a young woman is definitely not the norm. Yeah, it's typically much older folks who have had really successful careers and have come to swimming. And so even though it's international, it is still, there are lots of accessibility issues that I think the community wants to address, but has limited scope to do that right now. Well, no one's traveling anyway, so marathon swimming is a little bit on hold unless you have a great local backyard like Wellington, but yeah.
Sure. So then, kind of going off of that, have there ever been times when aspects of your identity, whether your age, gender, sexuality, etc., became limiting factors or were received poorly?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I'm a very proud, openly gay woman, and I'm younger. So I think even just being a young woman, like I said, kind of people are, check you out a little bit more, look at you and go like, oh, where did she come from in the marathon swim world? But especially when you're first coming onto the scene, but then you get to know everyone and you kind of become this weird, big extended family all over the world. But yeah, I've been always, because I came out when I was 18, 19 and started marathon swimming when I was 20-ish. So yeah, I had already been out for 2 years by the time I started marathon swimming, and I've always been, really kind of out and not ashamed of that component of my identity. In fact, very proud of that component of my identity. So, for example, when I did the Scar Swim series, that 4-day, 40-mile race, my mom was kayaking for me, and what happens is they drop you off at the start and you swim for a little bit in a pack, and then you catch up with your kayakers who are kind of down a little bit because they don't want it to be too crowded when the swimmers start for a safety thing. So my mom and I decided, in order for me to find her more easily, lots of people decorate their kayaks. So what we did is we put Kevin, who is this All Blacks Kiwi mascot that my partner left for me when she had to come back after her visa ended. So I had my Kiwi at the helm, and then we had 4 flags. So we had the Colorado flag, the Czech flag, and a pride flag and a US flag. So all 4 of them were kind of sticking up at the front with Kevin, my Kiwi mascot. And so to make it easier to find my mom. But what was really great was a lot of the people, because it's a race of about 40 people do it every year. And so it's 40 swimmers, 40 kayakers, the race organizers, and it's quite a prominent display of lots of the best marathon swimmers in the world come to do Scar, because it's a beautiful swim series. And not a lot of people there, I think, knew that I was gay, because, if they weren't on my Facebook and seeing my posts of different things, they may not have known. And so I was interested to see kind of what the response would be from the flags that I had. And it was actually a really great experience. People came up, because when we would be on the staging beach getting ready, putting sunscreen and Vaseline on to get ready to swim, people would come up and ask like, oh, what are all of the flags? Because they may not have recognized like the Czech flag or the Colorado flag, for example. And so I talked them through it, and obviously I always talk about the pride flag. And then I also started, when I did the Manhattan race, my mom and I bought zinc oxide, which is basically just like pure sunscreen, but you can get colored zinc oxide. So we painted and colored zinc oxide pride flags on my back, because we were swimming in July and it had just been Pride Month. So so the entire swim I had a pride flag on both of my shoulders and a pride flag on my cheeks in zinc oxide. So and overall it's been nice, because people in the community, in the open water community, who are also LGBTQIA+, have reached out to me on a couple different occasions, just thanking me for being kind of out and within the community, because there aren't a lot of gay or queer open water marathon swimmers, because there just aren't that many open water marathon swimmers, but yeah, definitely not a lot of queer folks. So so I've had lots of really lovely exchanges with folks saying, yeah, I haven't always felt comfortable, but I really appreciate that you are representing in such a kind of out way, and I really appreciate that. Yeah, if anyone's had any issues with me, they've definitely never said anything to me. I think the feeling in general is, it really is like a family. And once you're in, people just really embrace you and appreciate all aspects of who you are, which, is, I think, the beautiful thing about a sporting community that is really diverse inherently, because we are traveling and going all over the world. So it's people who intrinsically appreciate diversity and variability in human experiences and identities.
Yeah. No, I love that. I hope you didn't get pride flags sunburnt onto you. I hope that the zinc oxide is strong enough.
I had the opposite. It was perfect. I was worried that I was like, oh, am I going to have weird boxes like on my face because the zinc oxide will be stronger than the other sunscreen?
Sure.
And luckily that didn't happen, but it always does happen that I get a really gnarly cap tan, and usually a good goggle stripe that after every marathon swim. And after my Topa swim, I had my skin right here turned to like the most crackly. It was horrible. And I was literally sunburnt for weeks. I might, if you're lucky, I'll send you a picture of what I looked like after. Yeah. I really don't wear makeup other than maybe a bit of mascara, but I was calling my partner's sister, who is great with makeup and much girlier than either of us are, begging her when I was in the supermarket, like, please, like, tell me, in the department store, like, tell me what I need to buy, because I look like a monster. So please, like, explain, like, BB cream, like, what's that? Like, how do I put it on? I need a sponge. Okay, like, trying to cover up my horrible suntan cap tan.
Have you ever had, like, your goggles or anything just, like, glued to your face?
It's so funny because when you're swimming for hours and hours and hours, you have to make sure your goggles are really comfortable. And there have been so many training swims where it's like you just can't get them to feel right, and they end up giving you headaches because they're too tight and all these different things. But no, luckily, I've never had a really bad experience, but I've definitely come away with some gnarly kind of imprints on my face for a couple hours after my swims.
That's awesome. So then, what would you say that the most challenging parts of pursuing long distance swimming have been? Not just the swimming itself, but everything that comes with it.
Yeah, I think it's really one thing, finding the time. And I feel like this applies to so many things, especially as after you've graduated from university and now you're entering into your adult life and you're working full time, and also trying to just navigate what things do I want in my life and how much time and capacity do I have to give to them. So honestly, finding enough time and being ready to make the commitment to shuffle around your life to do that. Because essentially when you're in full marathon training mode, I don't like calling it a sacrifice, because you're doing it because you really love it and it fills up your cup. But you definitely sacrifice a lot of social time and, kind of I didn't go out for drinks. I didn't go out for dinner. I didn't go out to concerts or museums, or all the things that I typically love to do for maybe for the 6 months before I did my swim at 80K swim, because because you just have to spend all the time you have outside of work swimming, because I would go to the pool and swim from 6 to 7:30, get on the bus, get to my office, work all day, take the bus back to a pool, swim again, maybe also lift weights, come home, eat dinner, fall asleep. And you just do that day in and day out. So yeah, I think the hardest part is just really finding the time, creating the time, and really committing to do that for a period of time, and knowing that, of course, afterwards you can kind of go back and have a bit more balance and explore some things, but just knowing like, nope, for the next however many months, this is what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm going to dedicate myself to.
Amazing. That's so cool. I mean, I feel like with a lot of these interests, that's how it ends up turning out, but it's wonderful that you've been able to do that. And so then, kind of coming into that, how does swimming relate to other parts of your life? So does it ever run into your work or your social life? Obviously, it constricts your social life sometimes, but how have you related it to those areas?
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of living your life in a way that reflects your values. So I've always tried to, since I spend and infuse a lot of my time into marathon swimming, to make it align with my values in other ways. So I've done a variety of things, like in the past doing some swims. I've partnered with some organizations and with some companies that I really support what they do and kind of the values they promote. So a couple of really awesome like women's empowerment clothing brands, like sportswear brands, and so things like that. But also what I want to do more and more in the future is really use swims as an opportunity to raise awareness about particular issues. I have a really amazing friend in New Zealand named Bree, who swum the Cook Strait and done some marathon swims. She did a single crossing of Lake Taupo last summer, and she actually biked all the way from the very top of the North Island to the bottom of the North Island over weeks. It's a very long distance, and she did it with a friend. And the entire way that she was coming down, they were stopping at schools and promoting. Basically, they were talking about plastic waste in the ocean and conservation and ocean efforts. And so I think marathon swimming has the ability to, because it's a big kind of spectacle sport where people are like, oh my God, this is a huge challenge. And people more and more now are using it to either raise awareness or raise money for different organizations and different causes. And for example, my Lake Taupo swim, it happened not this past year, the year before actually. And it happened, my swim was scheduled just 3 days after the Christchurch terrorist attacks happened in the mosque. So I originally was I was working with a charity, a nonprofit, to raise money around kind of environmental causes in New Zealand. And I talked to them just because of the timing of that event and decided and they were happy. And I shifted so the entire time I was swimming there, what happens is you have a GPS tracker that follows you. So people anywhere in the world can kind of track you, this little blinking dot across wherever, and they can see how fast you're swimming and how far you've gone. And then in the upper right-hand corner, there was a donate button for basically giving money to families that were affected by the mosque attack. So I think the biggest thing in terms of infusing my kind of marathon swimming with other aspects of my life is that, I really hope to show up as my full self, no matter what realm I'm in, whether that be in my professional world, in this athletic world, or in my personal, life. I just carry myself throughout. So it intrinsically becomes all very interlinked. So in my athletic life, those people become my friends. The things we talk about end up being about the things that are all important to us. We, not only have those conversations, but then really try to use platforms of swims to, talk about these kinds of issues. I'm really hoping, I want to do the Cook Strait, hopefully before I leave New Zealand. And I'd really love to, because I work for an organization that's the primary refugee resettlement agency in New Zealand. So what I want to do is use that swim to raise awareness around the issue of forced displacement and migration, and raise money for refugee resettlement efforts that are happening in New Zealand. So I think does that answer your question about how those things are interconnected?
Yeah, I guess that leads me to kind of another question, which is, how much does it cost to be a marathon swimmer? And like, how can you afford it? How accessible are these scholarships? You mentioned it earlier on, but can you speak a little further about it?
Yeah, totally. So it really depends. So for example, when Paige Christie gave that talk about swimming the English Channel and in the philosophy department, she then also talked about how much it costs on average, and it can cost up to like $15,000 or even more to do, as an American swimmer, to do the English Channel, because you have to pay for the sanctioning fee, the boat captain, you have to fly to England, you have to fly your whole crew to England, you have to stay there for a 2-week window because you book in on a tide. So you don't have a guarantee like, oh, I only need to be there for the weekend. You have to be there for a full 2 weeks. So it's accommodation in Dover, and then flights back. And then obviously the supplies, like the food that you're going to eat, that your boat folks are going to eat, your sunscreen, your zinc oxide, all these different things. Those aren't that expensive, but all together, I heard the price tag of, $15,000, over $10,000. And I just thought, well, that's me, that's done and dusted. There's no way I'm ever going to afford that. So I'm just not going to think about it or try. But then I started hearing stories and reading things about other people in the US who are doing marathon swims. And Charlotte Samuels, who's actually who at the time was the youngest person to have ever completed the Ocean 7 challenge. She's really amazing. And she ended up and she was a Smith student as well. She was a first year when I was a senior, but she had done a swim from I can't remember exactly where, basically New York to the Jersey Shore. And it was like a 19 to 22 mile swim. And it like cracked my mind open that I was like, oh my God, the English Channel is not the only place that you can do a marathon swim. You can actually do a marathon swim. Like, I live in Massachusetts, like New York and New Jersey, like that's close by. I could drive there for the day and do a swim, and then I'd only have to pay for like the boat to accompany me. So it really opened my eyes to, oh wow, this is actually something that could happen. So my first swim that I did, the total cost of it was just, it was about $1,500. So 1,500 compared to 15,000, quite different price points. It is still that's still not a small amount of money, but it's kind of one of those things of like, I've had the same iPhone for the last 5 years. Other people will spend, $1,000 or to buy the newest thing or newest that. I don't care about designer clothes. Most of my clothes are from op shops and secondhand stores. And, so I think there's definitely a degree of, you decide to save and spend money on things that you really want and infuse your life with happiness and meaning, whether that's the newest iPhone or maybe a marathon swim. So that's a component. But I've definitely been very fortunate. I have a really amazing supportive family, and they've definitely they're really proud of the swims that I do. So whenever I come up with a new idea, they're always chomping at the bit. Oh, can I give you a couple $100 so that will help you do your swim, or can I do this or do that? Part of the reason I was able to do my Popa swim, which is probably the most expensive swim I've done to date, was because my babushka passed away a while before. And she left me a couple of things. And so I was able to spend some of that money to be able to do that swim. And it felt symbolic and meaningful because she passed away when she was 80 years old, and the swim was 80 kilometers. And so it kind of felt like a memento and a remembrance for her. Anyway, so all this is to say that there are lots of swims that you can do for really not that much money. You can do things like a 10K race for, $80, $100, the entrance fee. So it really depends. And if you want to do kind of these bigger swims, especially if you're a younger person, and the best thing that you can do is really try to find partnerships, find companies who may want to work with you, especially if you're doing it not just because you want to do it for yourself, but you want to do it surrounding something else. And then, there are definitely some scholarships that people can apply for and get into. It really depends. It's swim by swim. There's no international monetary fund. There's no IMF for marathon swimming. So you kind of have to do it case by case. But it's definitely a community that if young people want to get involved in, people are really supportive of that and wanting to engage people who want to do it. So it can happen, but it is absolutely definitely more challenging. But I think the best thing to do is to start small, to smart in kind of local contexts, doing smaller swims, and then being able to build up when you kind of build a bit of a reputation and can kind of take it further and get more, if you can get more attention, you can usually get more people to kind of sign on to say, do you want to chunk of change to help you do that?
Sure. And then what, kind of going off of that line of thought, what are your suggestions for those young women who wish to pursue an immature sport, and what are the best ways to make it happen?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is find your people, find the community of people who also love the thing that you're doing, especially in sports. Obviously, lots of sports being team sports, that's kind of inherent. You have to find the other people, otherwise you're just kicking a ball around by yourself. But with individual sports like marathon swimming, obviously you could do it all on your own, but really the way that you become successful or can pursue it really well is by finding a community of folks around you who can do it with you. And I think the biggest thing is to just find, whether it's an amateur sport or not, to just find the thing that that gives you happiness and purpose. And if you can tap into that and figure that out, whether it's a marathon swim or any number of other things that you can dedicate a lot of time to, if you can do that and you can find people who will rally around you and encourage you, and you can do it side by side and build a community around it, I think that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Great. I'll have to keep it in mind. And then, so what?
Oh, actually, can I say one other thing?
Yeah, go for it. Bring it in.
The other thing is, always ask questions. Like, always, if you find someone that you are inspired by and have no background in what they're doing, but you're interested in it, like, just reach out to people and ask them things. I know for me, there's no way I would have gotten to where I am today had I not had so many people who had more wisdom and more guidance and experience who I reached out to, or who reached out to me and just gave me an amazing, generous offering of their experience, their ideas, and their knowledge. And now that's really what I aim to do when people are coming up and will message or say that, like, oh, I'm kind of interested, can you tell me more about this? I always will make time to do that and to have those personal interactions, because that's how I've become who I am in swimming, because people, amazing swimmers, have taken the time to give me help and advice and guidance. And so, yeah, whether it's open water marathon swimming, feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure with this, people, Instagrams, things, feel free to reach out to me. But in any area that you're interested in, reach out to folks. If you don't hear back, like, reach out to someone else, because, yeah, making and building personal connections and getting direct advice, that's the best way that you can kind of equip yourself to start a new thing.
Sure. And then I guess, what motivates you to continue swimming? You've put out all these lofty ideas, but at the core of it, what motivates you?
I think at the real root of it, or the real core, is that I just constantly want to find out what my limit is. And I just really, one of my favorite quotes is, do that which you think you cannot. So, and Lynn Cox, who's a really amazing, famous swimmer, she always says that you shouldn't do swims that you know you will be successful at, that you know you can do. So I think there's a challenge element to it for me, around wanting to do things that I don't know I have the capacity to do, because that's the only way in which you really discover your full potential and what you're physically and mentally capable of doing. So I think the core of it is just wanting to push myself to say, how far is too far? And you can only find that out by trying to push further than you ever thought you possibly could. So yeah, it's honestly a deep-seated need for, I think, punishment.
But then you have the people around you to help reel you back in, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But I think it's just this deep need of, how far can you go? How much are you actually capable of?
Yeah. And then I guess so what swims are you interested in competing in the future? You've already done some pretty impressive stuff, but what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, I think, because in the marathon swim world, there are all these kinds of lists that people have created. So these challenges that they've set out have kind of prescribed things to do. So there's the Triple Crown of open water swimming. There's the Ocean 7. All these different things. And it's an amazing accomplishment to be able to say that you're one of however many people who's done the whole list of little swims. But the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that the swims that I want to do, it has like a deeper, I have to really feel, it sounds kind of funny to some folks, but I really have to I have to feel a connection with the body of water that I'm going to be in. And I know in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, which is the indigenous name for New Zealand, and Te Ao Maori, which is the world view or the world perspective and kind of ideology of Maori, and again, the indigenous people of New Zealand, they talk about things like mana, like the life force, and Maori ora, the life force of things. And in Lake Taupo, when I was swimming, I really felt, I was in the lake for 27 hours, so I was intimately connected to it. But I guess, and in the kind of contemplative exercises I do, I spend a lot of time feeling and thinking about myself in water and really letting myself be in the majesty of being a tiny, tiny thing in this much more powerful thing around me, especially in the ocean, which is a magical place for lots of people, for surfers and swimmers and scuba divers, and anyone who's grown up in a coastal place usually has a deep kind of love and spiritual connection to the ocean. So for me, and especially after swimming Lake Taupo and really feeling connected to the mana of that body of water, I really for the future swims that I want to do, that has to be there for me. Like, I don't want to just do a swim because I know I just said before that the thing is about challenging myself, but the other thing is about really experiencing yourself as a very small thing in a much bigger, powerful thing. And really being respectful and appreciative of that body of water, and wanting to have an experience with it that really cherishes really cherishes it. So it's a very not Western conception of environment of experience of man and the environment. It's a much more indigenous stewardship around the appreciation of land as an entity and as a living thing that we can experience. So the next kind of swims that I want to do, there are a couple of bodies of water that I really feel that around and really want to have that experience. So the first one is the Cook Strait, and I'm pointing this way because it's literally, if I go out my door right here and go up on the street, I can see the Cook Strait. So every day I wake up and I see I can see the South Island from Wellington, the North Island, and I look at that body of water. Exactly. And I see it every single day. And I've never been in a place where I've lived where I've looked at a body of water every single day and not swum across it. So that's the next one that I really want to do. And then beyond that, I had another swim planned that I wanted to do back in the US because I was thinking we would move back and I'd go to grad school in the next couple of years, which I won't say now what it is, but it's very, very, it would be 100-kilometer swim. So it'd be longer than my Topa swim, and it'd be several crossing of a body of water, which no one's done yet to the state. Maybe by the time travel's allowed, someone will have done it before I have the chance to go and try it. So Cook Strait, and then we'll just see how we go and where I live and what bodies of water speak to me. And I want to thrust myself into to have an experience with.
Well, I look forward to following along with your other future secret endeavors.
Thank you.
Just to go off of that, do you have any other thoughts or anything else that you want to add to this podcast? I think we're all done. You answered all my questions. Amazing.
I feel like I've been talking a lot. So
no. It's like I don't have much to add because it's a whole new world for me. But I'm so happy to get all of this. I think it's wonderful. So thank you.
No, thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity, and also just for what you're doing. I think connecting women and connecting just people's stories from a lot of different contexts. I think that's you think about how big the world is, how complicated the issues are, how multifaceted and layered things really are in the context of modern societies, and how difficult it is to start to dismantle things to really create change. But I think a kind of key component is always going to be really focusing on human connections and a really humanistic view of how can we see each other and hear each other and experience each other. And so I think sharing stories from different contexts and different kind of life experiences, I think that's kind of the key. It almost kind of reminds me of, going back to part of our origin of knowing each other and thinking about Rotary exchange students. Of the whole point is, if you send a student abroad, and you give them this cultural experience, and also then the people who are around them, and engaging with people from another place in a very different cultural context, that you build kind of diplomatic connections, because it's harder to hate or to misunderstand someone when you know them personally. So I think that's exactly the point of this kind of work and this kind of stuff, is to, when you know someone personally, or when you hear someone really talk about their story, all of a sudden that kind of cracks people's mind open to each other's humanity. And I think that's how we'll move forward. That and lots of really radical, amazing protesting. So those two things in combination, I think, is how we make progress. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing and for this amazing project.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks.
Yes. No worries.
Yay!
Woohoo!
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for everything. Yeah, that was great. That was awesome. This is so cool.
Yay! Oh, good.
Along with some of your swimming stuff beforehand, but I haven't heard all the nitty-gritty details, so it's really cool to get that. Yeah.
Oh, yay. Oh, well, I'm so glad. And I hope, when you first emailed, because I've done a couple of podcasts before, but they've always been like the point is about marathon swimming. So I'm like, oh, of course, like, yeah. So I'm glad that it fits into what you're kind of working on. And yeah, hopefully it was okay.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic. I think, because I guess what I was trying to capture was both that, like, yeah, marathon swimming is like a really essential part of your life, and like it's super fascinating to learn about, but also how does that connect to your identity and like your community, and like what's the larger kind of motivations and, I don't know, feelings, I guess, and rewards you get out of doing that.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Awesome.
So thank you so much. So okay, we'll wrap this up. If you have any other follow-up